Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, let's try one more time. Just one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I love it, I love it. I'm Susan Madera. I'm Academic Program Manager for High Impact Practices at Queensborough Community College, and I'm also the coordinator of the Common Read Initiative. This year, approximately 1,400 students are reading this book, The Road of Lost Innocence by Somaly Mom. How many of you have started to read this book already? How many of you have finished reading the book? Okay, excellent. There are many themes in this book. We can speak about sexual trafficking, education. We can speak of health issues in Cambodia. We can speak of the history of Cambodia. We can look at the statistics of human trafficking. The goal of the Common Read Initiative is to look at a text from many different angles to help you to make the connections across these various disciplines. We're thrilled today to have with us Meg, I'll keep it short, I'm sorry, Meg Tarafdar, the Associate Director of CETL, which is the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. Meg's an adjunct assistant professor of English at Queensborough. She has taught composition and rhetoric, technical writing, and world literature courses in Oklahoma, Texas, and New York. Her research interests include Eastern perspectives in world literature and intercultural communication. Today, Meg is going to be speaking to us about the author, but from a completely different perspective. We're looking at Somaly Mom as a Bodhisattva. So with that, I would like you to join me in welcoming Meg Tarafdar. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon to reflect on some of the questions that come up in the book, The Road of Lost Innocence. There are many themes, as you just heard, and for those of you who have completed the book, you will see that the themes emerge all through the book, so many ways to look at it. And one of the themes that we are going to look at is the question of suffering and compassion. And with that, we will introduce to you a concept, the concept of Bodhisattva. And so just to introduce the framework of the suffering and compassion that happens in this book, Somaly was born in a village deep in the Cambodian forest. She was sold into sexual slavery by her grandfather when she was 12 years old. And for the next decade, she suffered unspeakable acts of brutality and witnessed horrors that haunted her for the rest of her life, and we cannot even, that will haunt us as well as we read the book. She became a brave leader in the fight against human trafficking. She rescued sex workers. She also provided them shelter, rehabilitation, healing, and love, and in order to give them or lead them through a new life. So as you think about what really happened, the question that we all ask is, what is the cause of all this suffering? How do we handle this? What is this suffering all about? What is the way out? So one of the concepts, and this concept comes from Buddhism, which is from the 5th century BC actually. It is Bodhisattva. Bodhi means enlightenment, and sattva is a being. So essentially, it is a being who is enlightened, who is awakened, who is learning, who is enlightened. You will receive a handout where I will sum up all these major ideas, the definitions. So here is a person who is on the path to becoming enlightened. Ask yourself the question, how do we become enlightened? Have you wondered about that question? We are going to talk about, this will be in the form of a conversation. I'm going to give you a lot of guiding principles. But first thing is to reflect on what you know about enlightenment. We all say we want to be awakened. We want to be aware. We want to be enlightened. So how do we become enlightened? So on your little note card, just jot down maybe 2 or 3 points that come to your mind, through 2 or 3 ideas, and we'll share maybe from a few of you as to what is your view on how do we become enlightened. We all want to be enlightened, right? Do we? Yes, we don't want to be ignorant. We don't want to be unaware. So how do we become such? Okay? All of you have at least a couple of ideas on what you think is enlightenment, or how do we become enlightened? Okay, so during this session, we're going to talk about the different types of suffering and what you can do about that in order to become enlightened. So let's see what anyone wants to share. How do we become enlightened? It doesn't have nothing to do with the book, just generally. Yes. Anyone? Just raise your hands. Yes.
Learning from our mistakes.
Learning from your mistakes. Wonderful. See? They're already enlightened. Here, one more instance, one more idea that you may have. How do we become enlightened? Yes.
Redemption.
By? Redemption. Okay. That's interesting too. So let's see. Yes, so you all are on the right track. So a bodhisattva is a person who is on the way, on the path to become, to have pure compassion towards all. So as you said, we become enlightened when we learn from our own suffering, our own mistakes. So we're able to then have compassion for others who are also suffering. So that's the path to bodhisattva. And in the process, you become generous, you become self-sacrificing, you become more aware, you become brave, you develop all these qualities on the way. As you see on the image on the screen is of a bodhisattva, actually a female bodhisattva. She's holding, what is she holding in her hand? She's holding a sword, right? Some type of weapon, right? What is that? What does it symbolize? What is it? Why do you need a sword? To fight. Very good. To fight against what? The bodhisattva is holding a sword in one hand to destroy all delusions. What is the hurdle? What is the enemy of enlightenment? It's delusion. Just to explain it a little more. How many times you think, I already know the chapter very well? You're asked to read the chapter and you say, I already know. You go take the exam and you figure out that you didn't quite know the chapter, right? So it was the delusion. It was what is a delusion? It is a misconception, a belief that you have that may or may not be so right. It is inaccurate knowledge, something inconsistent, so we're all deluded. So this bodhisattva uses a sword to cut through the delusion or to destroy the delusion, which are obstacles in the path of wisdom and compassion. So, and we'll talk more about how can we not delude ourselves. One step, of course, is to read the book. When you read the book, you see you were not even maybe aware the extent of the brutality that is going on. So that delusion is gone, and now you can develop compassion for those that are involved. So essentially, and you're going to get a handout in which I have defined this, a bodhisattva is an ordinary person who takes up a course of selfless service. Do you see that in Road of Lost Innocence? Also, it is an enlightened being who undergoes many stages of suffering and then eventually reaches a sublime state, a higher state. And the person is determined to free other people from the suffering. And that's what makes a bodhisattva unique. Whenever you start thinking from the point of view of helping others, that is the unique thing. So just a little framework for our thinking about some suffering and compassion. The Buddha taught 4 truths about life. The first truth is there is suffering. The world is full of suffering. And we'll talk about what that means. The levels might be a little less or more, but there will be some type of suffering always. There is a cause for suffering. Every suffering has a cause, and you have to find the cause of it. And we'll discuss a little more. So start thinking about and reflecting on this. There is an end of the suffering. There is a possibility. There's a light in sight. And there is a path of practice that can put an end to that suffering. And so that's going to be, these are the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. So what I'm going to show you next is a typical, a very popular image of the 1,000 arms of compassion. What comes to your mind when you think about compassion, 1,000 arms of compassion? What do the 1,000 arms mean? We have 2 hands, right? Yeah. And we can do so much, right? You agree? If we had thousands of those, what would we be able to accomplish? A lot of things. A lot more. We could be all pervasive. We could go everywhere. We could extend our services towards all beings. So what's happening in this image, and I'm going to talk about some of this, and this is of one of the Bodhisattvas who is known for the 1,000 arms of compassion. The palm of each hand is marked with an eye. What do you need the eye for? It's the eye of mercy. It is to see the sufferings of all beings. So if you extended the hands, you will see the sufferings and to help others in overcoming the suffering. The 2 central arms holds a wish-fulfilling gem. How many times you felt, I wish I could help the people overcome their suffering, but you cannot do that because you have inadequate resources. So if you had a wish-fulfilling gem, you could probably aspire to do something like that. One hand holds a wheel, the one on the right side. It's the wheel of teaching and benevolent governance. Like if you teach someone something that can change the suffering, an upraised hand holds a bow and arrow. Another hand holds a lotus, which symbolizes purity and renunciation. Each of these concepts, it will take hours to explain, but I just wanted to show you how this is a multidimensional image. The 10 faces indicates his Bodhisattva stages, and the 11th phase is for universal compassion. So many different ones, and there are many stories associated with this particular Bodhisattva. There was a time when this Bodhisattva felt that they had taken care of all the suffering of, in the area that they were involved in. Then Buddha says to him, look behind you, and there were another army of sinners coming up. So you can never take care, the work never gets done. So even with your 1,000 arms, you have to go on and on. So it's the 1,000 arms of compassion, always remember that. The Bodhisattva, some of the goals that are in mind for Bodhisattva, they are still subject to birth, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, delusion. It's not like they have completely attained a redemption from everything. They're on the path. So you are a Bodhisattva, I am a Bodhisattva, we are all Bodhisattva if we have decided that we want to seek enlightenment. We want to become more compassionate, to look at suffering and do something about it. This is an interesting quote. A man asked Lord Buddha, I want happiness. And he said, take away the I, because that's an ego. Remove the want, because that's desire. What do you have left? Happiness. So that is a path to, once you remove your self-interest from the thing. And I'm going to talk about some of the Jataka stories. There are stories associated with Buddha's previous birth. Buddha had to go through many cycles of life and death before he actually attained enlightenment. So each cycle taught him something. He was born in different forms. He was born as a woman, different many times. So he knows the suffering, and he did go through a lot of suffering during those births. So he understood all the different, he was born as someone from a lower profession, he was born as animals, he was born as different ways. So here is an example I just want to share with you. The Jataka stories, these are basically the birth stories of the Buddha from his previous births, and some of these links have been included. And remember, these are from Buddha's timeline is from 563 to 483 BC. These stories were recorded in 300 to 400 AD. Okay, here is one story, and let's see what you have to make of it. In this particular story, in this life, Buddha was born as a white elephant. He was a very compassionate elephant who had a relatively happy life. One day, there was this person, a forester, who was lost in the forest. So the white elephant says to the forester, "You come with me and spend the night with me, and tomorrow I'm going to send you on your way." The forester says, okay, so he stays with him, he becomes his friend for that night. He then says to the elephant, "I'm up my neck in debt." He was very sad. So the elephant says, "Why are you sad?" He says, "I have so much debt, I don't know, what am I going to do?" So the elephant says, "Well, I have this piece of tusk which you can have if you want to alleviate your debt." So the forester says, "Oh, that's a great idea." The forester takes his tusk, goes back to the village, cashes it in for money, lives a great life, spends a lot of money on different things. He runs out very soon. Then he thinks about it. Well, let me go back to the elephant. He has this other tusk as well. Or I can cut off. He cuts off only half of it first. He comes back to the forest and he finds the elephant and he says, "Look, I have spent all my money on luxurious goods for myself." So he says, "Your tusks," the last paragraph, "your tusks have cleared my old debts, but I need money to live," he pleaded. The gentle, benevolent elephant once again sat down and said, "You may have what is left of my tusks." The elephant courageously bore the excruciating pain as the forester pulled out the remaining tusks. The forester then packed the tusks into his bag and headed back to Varanasi, which is where he came from, and he said, "I'm done with you, my friend. I've got all there is to get." The elephant, torn and trembling, watched the forester go. Not a word of reproach escaped the elephant's lips. He lived the rest of his life in the peace and quiet of the Himalayas. What do you see in the story? The two concepts that are juxtaposed. The forester is greedy, and the white elephant, that's a bodhisattva, because he is still compassionate. He does not lose his belief in compassion, although he was hurt and he felt he was self-sacrificing. Do you see? And to give another example while we are at it, and then we'll go back. Another famous Jataka tale is the turtle who saved lives. And there are many, many stories like this. A group of merchants were sailing when a storm hit. The giant Bodhisattva turtle saw the shipwreck and saved the merchants by letting them climb on his back. He brought them safely to land. Tired from the long swim and heavy load, he fell asleep on the sand. The merchants were hungry and thirsty, and after the ordeal were over, they were not sure about their lives. They discussed amongst themselves how to find food. One of them said that they should kill and eat the turtle. The turtle heard it, and out of compassion for the merchants, decided to stay put and be eaten. So in the timeline, in the different cycles of life, the Bodhisattva can go through a lot of different types of experiences, and that's the way to enlightenment. Now, it's not to suggest that you give up what you're doing, but what it does is it's symbolic of how you learn from each of your experiences. So we'll talk about some of those steps. And just to give you another background, there are 42 stages of enlightenment. So whatever it is that you all wrote about, the different stages correspond to the 42 letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. And there are 40 stages in all where you get inspired, the 10 ways to get inspired, the 10 practices of virtues, the 10 transfers of merit, and 10 groundings of enlightenment. And we can go over some of these to see what you think about some of these things. And then there are 2 levels of enlightenment. Let's look at it. When you get inspired, let's look at any one of these, and if someone can share an example of when you felt you got inspired by an understanding of what happened before. Did you ever get inspired by not giving up, non-regression? You did not go back, you did not give up. Did you ever get inspired by applying the skills that you have? So that would be some of those. And I just want to, and we can talk about this a little more when we go on. And I'll come back to this. Let's think about the different practices of the Bodhisattva. Thinking about Somaly Mom, do you see awareness? On your little note card, look at some of the practices and see what stands out in the story. There are many, many instances when she talks about seeking refuge in different places, like she never had one place, like she always had to seek a shelter. Do you see, that was part of one of the practices, if you connect that. Friendship. Did you see friendship? Instances of compassion. For those of you who've read the book, if you can just think about any one of those instances. And then I'll see what you make of seclusion. Seclusion. Was she lonely? She was lonely a lot of times. In fact, in the beginning, she says she used to talk to trees because she didn't even know if anyone would be there to understand her sorrow and suffering. So seclusion is a concept that goes on all the time. Patience. She waited 10 years of suffering. She went through all that, but she never forgot that she had a mission. She had a goal to go on. Effort. Now let's talk about the stages of suffering. And this is where I would like some response from you all, because I would like to think that at least most of us have gone through these stages. Have you ever committed an error, a mistake of something, about something, when you said? So according to the concept of Bodhisattva, errors cause suffering. Do you see that? Can someone think of an example? A mistake. You forgot to bring your paper when the paper was due. You panicked. That was suffering. The professor said, 5 points off. Suffering. Do you see that? The police stops you, you don't have your driver's license with you. Error. It happened? Exactly. Do you see? Errors cause suffering. What else causes suffering? Criticism. Can you think of how Somaly Mom was constantly criticized for her skin color, for the language she spoke. Any other examples? Her appearance. So criticism is different from feedback. Feedback is more constructive. It is done with the purpose of improving something. Criticism is done with a different motive, to put someone down. So, and criticism causes suffering, whether you believe it or not, whether you like to agree or not. It does cause suffering. Harsh speech causes suffering. Hatred causes suffering. Negative actions, to put it politely, negative actions, it could be brutal actions. Do you see that? Corruption causes suffering. Do you see that? Exploitation of anything. Corrupt practices. The person ahead of you got something and you did not get because there was corruption in the system, and people had different biases and other things. Illusion can cause suffering. You think that you're doing okay. You find out much later that that's not true. And keep thinking about it. You will see a lot of examples in your life. Emptiness causes suffering. Do you see that? Impermanence. Who can tell me what that means? How does impermanence cause suffering? Impermanence. Who can tell me? What do we all look for? We look for stability. You at least want a home, a place to stay, a shelter. If you were homeless, impermanent state of being, suffering, right? Attachment. How does attachment cause suffering? Can someone give me a good example of that? If you're too attached to something. Yes.
For example, when you have to do something with another person, that you cannot do that with that person.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to live with that person with you. You have to walk with that person. You live for that person. It usually happens in the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
That you cannot continue with that person.
Mm-hmm.
As an example.
What happens then? Yes. Good example. There are many different ways to look at attachment. Yes.
Not being able to let things go.
Not being able to let things go can cause suffering. Or if you're too attached to anything, whether it's an object or a person, and the person has to leave or the object just falls into the sea, what happens? The more you're attached, the more suffering you will feel. Yeah. Do you see that? The level of attachment has to do with the level of suffering. Unpleasant circumstances generally would capture it all. So do you see that? Do you see all of these? Think about examples in the book. When something struck with you as, oh, this is a really brutal type of suffering, just as you're reading it, just mark that and you will see what can we do. And it's nothing unusual. It happens to all of us. The extent, the degree may be different. But we all experience different types of suffering in some form or other, in some stage of life or other. What is the road to enlightenment? If you're humiliated, have compassion. According to the Bodhisattva way practices, and you see that a lot in Somaly, ma'am. Do you? You're humiliated, you still have compassion. You have bodily injury, you still have compassion. So much compassion is still remaining that she goes back to the place that hurt her to rescue other people who are in that place. Most of us, when we experience injury, what do we say? I'm not going back there. Do you see that? So to retain that compassion, so if you're arguing, Bodhisattva, Somaly mom is a Bodhisattva, think from that point of view. Slander, someone insults you, uses bad, abusive words, you still have compassion. You go through suffering, you still have compassion. Someone steals whatever is remaining of your property, you still have compassion. You say that, okay, I'll still be kind to the people who have lost their property. In gratitude, like the elephant. Do you see what happened? The white elephant gave both the tusks, went through the pain. And you have to remember, the tusks are a symbol of the elephant. It is integral to their identity. So it's not just that the forester, the greedy forester, took away the tusk. What did the forester take away? The white elephant's identity. And the elephant still had compassion. Discouragement and compassion. How many times you want to take on a project and people discourage you from doing that, and you will still have compassion for others who are doing that project or something else. You're not going to hold it against whatever life that I wanted to do this, but I couldn't, I didn't have my opportunity, so I'm not going to help people who are doing this project because I could not do it. Do you see the compassion? And there's a lot to be said for that. Think about, again, some of the questions that I have heard from many students is, what does Buddha think about women? And I think it's important to explore that concept in the context of Bodhisattva as well. As I mentioned, Buddha was born as a woman different times of his life prior to becoming enlightened, because he has to experience all kinds of situations in order to know what types of mistakes might happen. So he created a monastic life, which is called Sangha, where women are equally active. He actively promoted the rights, the interests of women. In fact, I'm from India, and in India, Buddha is known as the first, one of the major human rights activists, because he's the one who went to areas where there were untouchables. There was a well where people wouldn't touch that well because low caste people occupied that area. Buddha on purpose stopped at the village, and he wanted to drink the water from there to show everyone that everyone is equal. You know, you don't think about it. And it is kind of interesting if you want to do more research on this subject. He has a different, this is quoted from one of his Digha Nikaya, one of his sermons. He talks about the respective duties of genders that are based on mutual respect and reciprocity. You know, you must remember this is 5th century BC, okay? He says, in 5 ways should a wife be ministered by her husband. By ministered, he means like taken care of by her husband. By respect, by courtesy, by faithfulness, by handing over authority to her, by providing her with ornaments, which is kind of symbolic, giving her what's needed. And these are the 5 ways in which the wife should attend to her husband. Her duties are well performed by hospitality to kin of both, like you take care of both parties' family, by faithfulness, by watching over the household goods, and by skill and industry in discharging duties. Do you see that? This was what he learned from all his different births. A little bit of overview on women and Buddhism. In China, in the late 7th century, Empress Wu, she was the empress, and she used the Buddhist rules or scriptures to justify her rule. Because in the Buddhist scriptures, it says that men and women have the same capability. Because a man could be born as a woman the next time, or a woman can be born as a man next time. So essentially, nothing changes by gender. It is how enlightened you are. That's what changes things. And so he did promote the cause of women, and he included them in his monastery or sangha, so they would be respected more, etc. In Japan, Buddhism came around the 6th century when there was a lot of acceptance in Buddhism, so it happened. However, some of the later sutras or the scriptures of Buddhism they mentioned that women are not capable of enlightenment in the same ways because of certain qualities that women have. So unfortunately for women in Japan, that sutra was adopted, and the people used that to justify the inequality of women. You know how when things are happening over centuries, you don't know how things transform. You don't know who is ruling at the time and what part of the sutra they're going to see. So they took the example of a princess who wanted to be enlightened and she could not, and they used that as something against the women. Now, coming to Buddhism in Cambodia, Buddhism has existed in Cambodia at least the 5th century. There were monks from Thailand, Laos, Burma, and Sri Lanka who participated in religious ceremonies as clergy in Cambodia. Okay, and I'm going to post this in the in your group e-portfolio, where you will have access to this article that talks about the impact of Buddhism on the Cambodian way of life. As you read The Road of Lost Innocence, do you see a lot of what I'm talking about in there? The Buddhist principles in practice? Somaly Mom, of course, embodies many of those principles, but do you see in the people? Yes or no? You see some of those, but mostly we do not see a lot of those principles being upheld because there's so much suffering, there's so much torture, there's so much brutality. So what really happened? In the pre-war Cambodia, Buddhism was seen or accepted as a crucial aspect of the Khmer identity. To be Cambodian is to be Buddhist. That's how it was. The Khmer Rouge years, there was massive destruction of temples, of images, of texts. Monks were forced to disrobe. The monks at the top of the mission, the Sangha, were executed. People were not allowed to worship, to conduct rituals, or do any practice. So the type of life that you see in the book, because some students did ask this question, what type of religion were these people practicing? So think about it. There was no Buddhism at the time of when the book is, the time period that the book describes. The Khmer Rouge attempted to completely eradicate religion, not only Buddhism, but also Christianity and Islam. So it happened. The socialist period from 79 to 1993, which is a lot of the period which is mentioned, Buddhism is allowed but tightly controlled. Men can only ordain as monks, and they have to be over the age of 50. The money for temple reconstruction was being diverted to other causes. So as you can see, a lot was going on. And I'm going to post this so you will be able to see a lot about the status of women in Buddhism. Now, when you think about, this is a little synopsis of the book from one of the sources. So when you think about it, what connections do you make with the concept of Bodhisattva and Somaly Mom? Just jot down a couple of those responses so we can share. What are some of the outstanding qualities that you see were demonstrated in the book? The qualities or virtues that were demonstrated. I'm just going to open it up on the screen. The first one is to impart joy to others. Do you see her doing that? Freedom from corruption, the light of love, insight and wisdom, overcoming difficulties, far-reaching goals. She had no money, but she had the goal that I'm going to do something about it. Unshaken resolve and persistence, understanding and awareness, following the path of commitment. Which ones stick out in your mind? Yes? All of them. Do you see that? All of the virtues that we talked about were seen in the story. All you have to do is look for examples to support your point, and you can actually write an essay on Somaly Mom as a Bodhisattva. And you can illustrate the qualities in there. And I wanted to mention, what does it mean, transfer of merit? There are some virtues that you have for yourself, and then there are some qualities that you can transfer to others. Can you name one quality that you keep to yourself and one that you can transfer to others? When you teach people, when you make people aware, you are transferring your enlightenment to somebody else. So these are called transferable virtues. Turning over spiritual merits to others, like you got, or it could be any type of merit. For instance, you get recognized for what you did. And you say, no, it's not just me, it's my whole team. Do you see that? So if you hear a person do that, they're on the way to Bodhisattva. They're not taking it alone. They're not saying, yes, I achieved this alone. No. So you're transferring your credit to other people. Returning to the area of suffering to enlighten others. And believe me, this is written 5th century BC. If something caused suffering to you and you are able to return there, it's a transferable merit. Because you just did not pack up your goodies and left. You actually went there and did something for those people. Rescuing and protecting others from suffering. Indestructible faith in the power of compassion. If you've watched any of the videos from Somaly Mom, you would see she's a total believer. It's like she never for an instant thought that compassion will not work. Do you see that power? Reaching everywhere, not just in your little village, but you go and reach everywhere. We are reading about it too. So that's part of the goal. See, the inexhaustible treasure of merits and virtues, these can be transferred also to others. Transferable virtues, merits. Strengthening and firming up one's mission. She started the foundation, and she's firming it up, and she's strengthening. Understanding and awareness is a very, very transferable merit. So what you learn from the book, if you're able to transfer what you learned from the book to another person, another group of people, you basically achieved one of the steps. Universally adapting to all living beings, so that's also one of the transferable virtues that we can think about. And of course, the practices of virtues is nothing new. You probably know that these are the 10. Remember we said 42? So 10 inspirations, 10 virtues, 10 transfer of merit, 10 principles of enlightenment, and of course then there are 2, which is manifestations. Virtues by themselves are not important. What you do with it, how do you show that is important. So if you're compassionate, it's good you're compassionate, keep it to yourself. If you show compassion, how do you show that? What do you do for other people so they will be able to see? So that's called the practices of virtue. So, and ultimately you see you achieve wisdom and enlightenment through that. At this point, I would like you to think about somebody. Now that we've talked about the different principles of enlightenment and Bodhisattva, can you think of a person, living or dead, that comes to your mind when you think of the qualities of a Bodhisattva? Who comes to your mind? So just write that down. And maybe some of you can share with the group. So, because we meet Bodhisattvas all the time, but we don't know what they're all about, and we don't share enough about them. Yeah, it could be anyone that comes to your mind as you were hearing about the different, practices. And what I would like to know is, another question, once you say who the person is, or I don't have to know them, but you can just say that this person, you know this person could be a bodhisattva because of this. So who wants to introduce the conversation on that? So just be brave. Jump in and offer, share. You want to say something? You have someone? Okay, here's a hand going up. Yes. Okay. And okay, the next question. You see all the virtues. It's very easy to say the practices of Bodhisattva. Okay, awareness, effort, equality. It's not hard to see that. Now the question to ask is, what kinds of suffering did this person go through in order to achieve those qualities of Bodhisattva? Do you see that? So the essential part that we are talking about is you cannot become enlightened until you make mistakes, until you suffer, until you go through all the stages of, you have to see for yourself, you have to go through for yourself, how do you feel when someone says a harsh word to you? So next time, when you're going to say to someone, you're going to be more enlightened, you're going to say, I'm going to be compassionate. I'm not going to say that. So the purpose is, if there's one takeaway from this, is how are you going to apply that to your life? So the next time, tell yourself, no, I suffered through harsh speech. I'm not going to give someone harsh speech. I suffered through corruption. I'm not going to be corrupt. Do you see that? I suffered through not having a place to live. So if someone doesn't have a place to live, I'm going to offer them because I know how it feels not to have it. Do you see that? So this is how you make the concept of Bodhisattva your own. And again, it takes a lifetime. It's a journey. You will not get done anytime soon, but you can take small steps to proceed with that. Who has a question? Yes?
Why is forgiveness a virtue?
I would say, from what the little that I know, I would say in order to forgive, you first need compassion. So I think what they did is they focused on the compassion part of it. Because once you have compassion, you can do multiple things. You can forgive someone, but forgiving by itself does not help the situation. You have to actually help them. You have to rebuild something. You have to rehabilitate something. For instance, with Somaly mom, if she had simply forgiven the people that hurt her, what would happen? Okay, she achieved a virtue for herself. But in order to make it a transferable virtue, she has to actually do something with it. Because compassion is a transferable virtue. You cannot keep it to yourself. You have to do something to others. So I think that may have been the rationale that compassion is seen. Also, compassion is at the heart of love. So love and friendship and anything. People become friends because they have that feeling towards each other. A very good question. Another question. Anyone was curious to know, or anyone thinks that, did you see that way? When you were reading about her, were you inspired by what she did? Were you amazed that how can this person who was, who went through such brutal circumstances overcome that, not just for herself, but decides to help? She is threatened all the time, as you will see in the pages of the book. People hold a gun to her head. They tell her not to come back. She could easily have a cozy life, have her own house, and forgive everyone who did whatever, right? But she didn't choose to do that. She wanted to go back again and again to risk her life, risk herself in order to rescue the others, because she knows the type of suffering that these other girls must be going through. So she goes there. So, okay, who wants to share? Yes.
In the greedy forester story,
Uh-huh.
and also in the book, it seemed like the people who acted with the most cruelty were the people who had a lot of debt. So I was just wondering.
Oh, that's a great connection. Yes.
About I guess, debt and compassion. Does a lot of debt cause people to act with less compassion?
Could be, because when you're in debt, your survival is threatened. When your survival is threatened, you become cruel. Do you see that? Your very existence is threatened because of your debt. And what does debt imply? Like, why do people get into debt? That's a whole question to ask, right? Because they are, yes, dishonest. They're greedy to begin with. If you're making $100 and you spent $150, so you're $50 in debt, why? Because you are greedy. You do not have, the self-discipline or control you cannot even control yourself. So to begin with, you have all those opposite qualities. There's no way you can be generous if you're in debt, because your own life is threatened. So I think that's a very good connection you made, and this concept was true even then. Do you see that? Like, this person, he got the tusks, he could have used it to improve his own life or the life of his family. Instead, he bought all these luxurious things that cost way too much. So he spent the money, and when he spent the money, you think about the source of the compassion, you go back to it and exploit that source. Guess what he did? He went back to the elephant to get more tusks because he knew the elephant will not say no. So he goes there and he exploits that source. We still have some time, right? Okay. So he exploits that source and then goes there. So typically what happens in life, when there's a compassionate person who is repeatedly exploited by greedy people or undeserving people, what happens to this person? Yes. They get taken advantage and they say, I'm not going to help anyone anymore. Do you see that? So the next time someone comes and says, can I have your task? No, because you know that this person is ungrateful, but a bodhisattva is not going to say no. Will do something, because it is up to that person to, I want to see if any of you are wondering, how does suffering end? Have we answered that question? So remember the Four Noble Truths? There is suffering, we know that. The moment we are born, there is suffering. And what happens then? There is a way that suffering can come to an end. We cannot avoid suffering, but it can come to an end. How? Anyone gets that concept? You have to do what? You have to do the right thing? Is that what someone said? Okay, so the concept is this, that if you help others alleviate their suffering, you're actually building a bank account of good karma, which is good deeds, which will eventually eliminate your suffering. Maybe not in this life, maybe in the next life, but that's the concept. There are practices through which you can eliminate that. Sometimes the joy that you experience by helping someone else can also help you forget the suffering that you had, because you feel that maybe you wanted something very bad and you couldn't have it, and someone else gets it, you help someone else get it. That joy can be transferable to you, in that sense, can be transferred. So one more example of who you had in mind. And it could be a famous person, it could be someone that you just know, like your teacher in high school is fine too. Yes? Okay, that's great. And so when you think about the practices of Bodhisattva, you see those? Do you see the stages of suffering? Which ones of these have or have not happened? Do you see that? So this is what you need to keep in mind, that there is no enlightened person who has not gone through suffering. because suffering is the key to enlightenment. So if you did not make mistakes on your homework, you're never going to have a perfect homework because you don't learn from those mistakes. Okay, one more example. Look at your note cards. Who do you have? Whose name came to your mind? Do you want to share your example? No? Okay. So what else do you have in mind about the examples? Who wants to share? Do you think the practices of Bodhisattva can be integrated in people's lives? Do you think so? You think it can be, maybe in mild doses, right? So, and that's one of the things, if you have a takeaway from it, is that to keep that in mind. And also to understand why someone else is like that. Remember in the greedy forester, here's the white elephant who's the Bodhisattva, but there's also the greedy forester. Life will always have this other element. You're not always going to be surrounded in a forest of white elephants only who are equally good as you, right? It's not going to happen. The Bodhisattva is a turtle, but the merchants are greedy. They're hungry. They need survival. So as you will see, so that's also another way to understand the world. You're not going to have an evil-free world. But if you escalate your capabilities and compassion, you will be able to make a difference in the other ones. Okay, so let's see. One last question, anyone? If not, then we will conclude with that. As you're, oh, you have a question, great.
I had a question just listening, and it seems being the Bodhisattva is very much individual, and the examples are more or less in a smaller scope that were given from the tales and examples. What happens in terms of dealing with war in Syria and all over the conflicts in the world today? And we know Somaly Moms is working one-on-one, and we call that the point of light.
Mm-hmm.
How does it work in more of a global perspective? Is it always the individual to 1 to 10, or can be broader scope that deals with thousands, or does it always work as the individual?
The concept is that because there will be suffering of all kinds, which is an accepted truth. However, what can we do at an individual level to become enlightened ourselves? So I think the concept is more like that. If we have more and more bodhisattvas, and then maybe more and more, for instance, all our students have the bodhisattva principles, and they all take positions like diplomatic positions in the world in a global scale, there will be some change. However, again, yes, it is that, and you got it right, it is at the individual level. It does not say that you need to have this ego saying, I can fix a lot of things. And that's another reason why compassion is the word that is used repeatedly, because anything other than compassion is an ego. Because if you say that I'm going to help others, that's an ego. Like, who are you? Like, how can you, where are you going to get the resources? But compassion, we have endless treasure house of compassion in all of us. So that's the concept. So yes, on a larger global scale, if people became more and more aware on their own, they'll make a difference in the policies that are being made. There'll be a difference in the level of corruption and exploitation, the power. All these are ego-related issues. So that's another thing. If you look deeper into Buddhism, that's what the concept is, that all the negative things emerge from our focus on ego and, basically ego, the concept, that I want more power, I want more wealth, I want a bigger house, I want more luxuries, so that's the root of all the evils. So if you make it compassion, if you have compassion in you, so you're going to see things differently. I already have what I need. Can I give my extra things to someone else? So I think that was what the belief system is. And yes, that's a wonderful question, yes. And maybe some of the students can make those connections and see how the leaders in the world have made a difference in spite of the corruption and the exploitation and all the negativity that's happening at massive scales. Okay.
Thank you so much, Meg. I just want to, just for a minute, go back to those two tales. And I want you all to be very honest with me. And so I'm going to put myself on the line first. When we speak about the elephant and the tusks, how many of you were thinking, oh, what a wonderful elephant that he gave his tusks? How many of you thought about the person, the forester, who was asking for the ivory? How many of you thought, what a greedy man? Okay, and in the next tale, when we speak about the turtle who saved lives, how many of you thought, that turtle's ridiculous? Why would he offer himself up? I did. How many of you thought, wow, that's really nice that he's going to let them eat him? Okay, you're laughing. And I think the whole point of this is we have to look at it from a completely different mindset. Instead of looking at it from, wow, how horrible, to how compassionate was the turtle. The turtle thought so much of saving these people that he put himself on the line. Imagine taking all these merchants and putting them on his back. Surely the weight of them could have put him under the water, but he was willing to help them. And his compassion was so great that he was willing to continue that quest to help them to survive by offering his life. So automatically look and think, that's silly. Why would you do that? But if we turn it around and look at it from the other point, the point of a bodhisattva who is so giving that he's willing to make a difference in this way. And so when Meg speaks to us about enlightenment, I feel enlightened, and I thank you for sharing this with us today, because it's given us an opportunity to look at things from a different perspective. And that's what this is really all about. At college, you're just not here to attend classes. We want you to become global learners and think of things differently. So we hope that by you attending today, you'll be enlightened. And now I'd like to ask you, what are you going to do about it? You've read about Somaly Mom and what's been happening with these people not only in Cambodia, but all over the world, human trafficking. What can you as an individual do about it? You've been enlightened, you know about it now. You've read the story. This is a memoir, it's a true story. You've attended events to find out what's going on globally. Can you do something about it? Yes?
Spread the knowledge to others about what you know.
Exactly. Enlightenment.
Awareness is the first thing of enlightenment.
Absolutely.
Spread awareness.
Spread the word. Let people know. Queens is the hotbed of human trafficking. Young boys are being trafficked in Flushing. People are being trafficked in Jackson Heights. Please consider joining us at an event on Thursday when Senator Jose Peralta will be joining us. He represents Jackson Heights. He actually represents Queens in the Senate. He's from New York. He's going to be speaking about what's going on in Jackson Heights, the legislation that he's been writing, what he's doing to help to stop this. And you, as global citizens, have information now that you can share with other people. Let people become aware of this problem, because by avoiding it, by looking away, it will continue on, and we don't want this to happen. So please take this knowledge, this information that you've learned, and share it with others. When you go home, speak to your family and your friends. Just say, did you know what's going on? Did you know that they're trafficking people? Do you know people are being kidnapped? Families are selling their children because they have no food for their table in some instances. Please share this information, and then you will be making a difference. So please, I want to thank you. I want to thank Meg for this wonderful presentation today. I want to thank you for coming today. Please keep in mind that there are 6 other events this week that we'd love to see you attend. And thank you, and have a wonderful day.